Welcome to The Explainer. We're skipping the small talk today because, frankly, we've got something incredibly profound and pretty urgent to unpack. Today, we're taking a highly technical mathematical paper, specifically focusing on the stability of the monomial basis kernel of Reinhardt domains, and we're translating it into a sweeping cosmological epic. We're talking about the fundamental architecture of reality, the transfinite, and how you and I interact with the strict, unbreakable mathematical laws of the universe. This isn't just a bunch of numbers on a page. This is about the high stakes of our very existence. Listen to this quote. "I speak as the personas of arithmetic, the invisible constitution that binds the void to the transfinite." That plunges us straight into the deep end, exactly where we need to be. It sets this incredibly heavy, almost mythic tone. The mathematical universe we're exploring isn't just some passive backdrop to our lives. It's a strict, uncompromising mechanism. It's a structural law that dictates the exact transition from absolute nothingness to absolute infinity, and it demands that we recognize its ultimate authority over our localized, everyday lives. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the localized finite reality. We really need to start by understanding our own limited human perception of reality. In complex geometry, a Reinhardt domain is a bounded space that remains perfectly symmetrical when you rotate it. Think of it like a perfectly sealed, unchanging terrarium. But allegorically, this represents our localized reality. Picture it as a bounded, isolated, dictatorial singularity. We're essentially trapped in this finite syntax, right? And we view ourselves as the sovereign authors of our own unique paths. Because we're inside this bounded terrarium, we tend to mistake our own computational limits for the whole universe. We act as dictators over our own specific, messy little subset of reality. Section 2, the invisible cosmic ledger. Let's pull back the curtain on the hidden architecture that actually governs these localized spaces. We can really frame this as a stark comparison. On one side, we have monomials. Think of these as simple algebraic terms, like x squared y. They're the natural building blocks of the space. They represent finite, individual, localized choices. It's the messy, exhaustible sweat of the human sequence. But on the exact opposite side, we have the p-monomial basis kernel. This represents the transfinite, the overarching universal ledger. So while our individual actions are bounded and finite, they are ultimately evaluated, filtered, and preserved by this infinite, unbending transfinite map. So what is this ledger? Well, the panmonomial basis kernel is a canonical series built from allowable monomials, and they're weighted precisely by their L to P norms. Think of these norms as the specific gravity or the definitive weight of each mathematical building block. This formula acts as the literal invisible constitution binding our finite domain to that massive transfinite structure. And what our mathematical sources prove is that this kernel depends continuously on the parameter p. It acts as this incredible stabilizing force of nature, keeping the entire cosmos in an unwavering, perfect balance, totally regardless of whatever chaos is happening down at our local level. Section 3, Geometry of the Shadow. Now, what's really interesting here are the rigid architectural laws that literally dictate reality's shape. Associated with every Reinhardt domain is its radial image, which is known as the Reinhardt shadow. This shadow is defined by strict linear inequalities in logarithmic space. Essentially, it casts a geometric silhouette that determines the allowable index set, what mathematicians call spec of omega. This is absolutely crucial because it represents the absolute limit of local geometric behavior. It maps exactly which states, which choices, and which truths are mathematically allowed to exist within your local universe. Simply put, if you don't fit the allowable index, you just don't exist in the kernel. No exceptions. Let's make this tangible by looking at some special classes of monomial polyhedra. The matrices that define these polyhedra act as unbending architectural laws enforcing our boundaries. For example, type A is an invertible integer matrix. It defines strict, localized bounded inequalities, walls you literally cannot cross. Type B is a block diagonal integer matrix. This one creates separated, rigid domains of truth. Think of them like cosmic zoning laws, isolating specific variables. And type C, that's a circular shift matrix, enforcing a recursive, unbroken, cyclic boundary. Guys, these aren't just numbers. They are the invisible gerrymander of reality, dictating the ultimate limits of our local illusions. Section 4, Crossing the Threshold, Exponents. This is where we approach the violent mathematical boundaries, where those local illusions completely break down. I want you to focus on the parameter p, which exists on a spectrum somewhere between 1 and infinity. As P shifts, the universe evaluates you differently. So I have to ask you, and I mean this uncompromisingly, are you ready to face the catastrophic boundary conditions of your own finite logic? Because as P slides along this scale, it eventually hits what mathematicians call a threshold exponent. And this right here is the climax, the threshold exponent event. This represents points of violent mathematical discontinuity. Imagine you're walking along a perfectly smooth curve, and suddenly it snaps into a jagged cliff edge. When you hit a threshold exponent, the allowable indices, that speck of omega we talked about, suddenly and irrevocably shift. This is the ultimate adversarial trial, where that localized dictatorial singularity, your perception of having absolute control, completely breaks down. The illusion of the finite domain shatters. It forces a sudden, dramatic evolution in the underlying geometry of reality. Your localized rules are completely swallowed up by the macro boundary. Section 5. The Transfinite Ramadanov Convergence. This marks the ascension from the finite into the ultimate transfinite geometry. Let's move to and see how this builds into what's known as a Ramadanov-type convergence. We start at time 1 with omega_1. That's your initial bounded finite domain. By time 2, we have omega_2, which is an expanding local sequence of domains as your reality grows. But it doesn't stop there. It pushes endlessly toward time 3, omega infinity, the absolute transfinite singularity. Your local domain is endlessly expanding and merging into one massive collective mathematical progression. The mathematics explicitly proves that the PNBK kernels uniformly converge to this absolute limit. As these finite domains merge into the infinite tail, this uniform convergence acts as the universal mechanism of escaping the finite illusion. The universe has a strict, uncompromising mechanism to perfectly balance reality. Anything localized and dictatorial gets mathematically scrubbed to exactly 0. All the mortal errors, all the local noise, it's all completely washed away to reach an ultimate, unbroken, transfinite continuity. So, I'm going to leave you with this final, uncompromising thought for today's explainer. If the quotient map guarantees that your localized, finite narrative is destined to eventually be scrubbed to 0 and dissolve into the transfinite limit, which eternal, infinite truth is your local domain secretly replicating? Make sure your trajectory is aligned with the infinite. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one.